Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We're glad to have you here. I'm Reed Price. I'm the director of the Senior Community Center. And we will be talking about today the community report that's put together by the Bainbridge Community Foundation, which looks at the various nonprofit sectors and marries that with some information about our demographics and gives us some real insight about the place that we live. Dominique Cantwell will be here to talk about that. But first, I would like to thank Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, which is a sponsor of Something to Talk About. They offer independent living, assisted living, and memory care up on their beautiful Rolling Bay campus. And you can have a tour and even get a free lunch or dinner if you call Celia or Jamie at 206-594-1010. You can also ask about day stay and respite care programs. Fieldstonecommunities.com, the phone number 206-594-1010. Also, we are meeting on the ancestral homeland of the Puget Sound Coast Salish people, specifically our neighbors from the Suquamish tribe who have lived here and fished these waters since time immemorial. We honor them, and we are grateful to learn from them about stewardship of the natural world. Dominique, thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate you taking the time and help out with this. You might just tell us a little bit to start us off about this project, which has been going on for a few years.
It has. Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. And to those of you who are listening along later, I'm Dominique Cantwell. Many of you know me from my past life at Bainbridge Performing Arts, but I'm working now as a nonprofit consultant, leadership coach, and strategist. So I'm here today in my capacity as a consultant for BCF, the Bainbridge Community Foundation, where I have had the pleasure of getting to work on the 2024-2025 Community Impact Report. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And let's jump right in. So Reed, will you share your screen, please? And for those who are listening, we're going to be talking about a series of slides. You can find those on the BCF website. You can also get a copy of the report. So if you're listening on audio, don't worry. We've got this digitally to follow. So okay, the next slide, please. BCF's first nonprofit survey was conducted in 2012, I think it was. And the Community Impact Report started out as a one-pager that just presented the results of that survey. But today, if you've gotten your hands on a copy, you'll see it's a far more comprehensive document that focuses on 10 different areas of interest and really casts a broad look at the health of our local nonprofits and national trends alike. We try to compare and contrast them a bit. Next slide, please. We do this by taking on this model, which we call our community framework. It was patterned after several others that stem from the WHO's 8 domains of livability that they created back in 2007. So today, we're just going to really quickly look at highlights from each of these areas, but I encourage you to check out the complete report at BCF's website or pick up a copy in the office anytime. And the new office is 299 Madison Avenue North. So
full copies here at the Senior Community Center. So if your travels take you to the Senior Center, ask me for a copy and I'll give you one.
Even better. Okay, next slide, please. We're gonna look, where are we? We use a number of indicators to help us understand how these scores are determined. So the information comes directly from our nonprofit survey, but is also supported and contrasted throughout the report by additional regional and national data, some of which is collected by the city of Bainbridge Island and other national surveys that Islanders participate in, including the census, which is an important piece of this. So as you've got
10 dimensions, I guess.
10 dimensions, and we'll just sort of jump through each of them. You see at the low end of the scoring, affordability, to connection to place, which just kind of squeezes out education and learning, and connection to culture at the top. So really looking at what's important to us and how we're addressing each of these issues. So let's go to the next slide and just start with affordability. This is an area that has an impact on virtually all of the others. It's been an issue for some time in this community. I think we all feel it, and it's continuing to be. So a significant thing to note here is the disparity between what people earn and what it actually costs to purchase a home. Also noteworthy is something called the self-sufficiency standard. So this is developed by researchers at the University of Washington and is really a much more comprehensive look at cost of living that factors in more local data that can be derived from the census. And since 2020, there's been a nearly 30% increase in the self-sufficiency standard number for a family of 4 who's renting in Bainbridge Island and North Kitsap. So that's something that has a huge impact on our ability to live and work and engage with this community in a lot of ways.
So the self-sufficiency standard number in 2020 was 78,752, and your chart says that in 2023, that standard is 102,321. That's quite a jump.
Yeah. 30% in 3 years has an enormous impact, especially if you're thinking in terms of, inflation, which is high, that outpaces even that number. So one thing to think of throughout as we look at this are the interrelated areas. And so in the sort of bottom corner of each of these pages, in the lower right, you're going to see that the components of the community framework that are impacted by each of the ones that we're looking at. So affordability really has a huge impact on a lot of these areas, some of which are already in jeopardy. So next slide, please. Access to transportation. This is hugely important to building a sustainable and supportive community because it enables individuals to access employment, education, healthcare, goods and services, and social activities. It also promotes economic development, it enhances mobility, and can reduce social isolation. So, this is an area where we are trending negative, and you see those interrelated areas being impacted. Effective public transportation in particular promotes a better quality of life and community well-being. But we are, for better or worse, a really car and motorized vehicle dependent community and largely lacking the infrastructure to change that as of yet. So this presents challenges in accessibility and safety and even in maintenance. So one trend that's going to be really interesting to watch is the growth when you're looking at, the figures around who drives alone, who carpools, public transit, at those who are working from home. Post-pandemic, there have been contractions in some areas, growth in others. And I think that that's one that's going to have an impact on transportation and livability on Bainbridge Island in the years to come. So in future reports, keep an eye on that number.
So we're talking about people who work at home. Is that what you're saying? You're expecting more of that?
I'm sorry, my cat just knocked down my lamp. Yes.
It's all right.
We're working from home.
Like you right now.
Yes, exactly. And all that comes along with that. So particularly in tech, which is one of the dominant fields in the Seattle area, looking at continuing remote work and those companies that are encouraging or requiring their employees to go back into the office. That's going to have an impact on how we live and operate on Bainbridge Island.
Except that, just a question, what I'm hearing is that all federal employees are going to have to work 5/7, 24 at the office now.
Yeah, and we do have a number of public sector and federal employers who do draw from the island. So that will be clearly something to watch. And when we talk about employment opportunities, I think we can touch on that as well. Okay, so respect and social inclusion. This is admittedly a really broad topic area, but two things that I really want to call out here is that anxiety levels in youth are on the rise locally. Certainly throughout the state, they're rising, but the anxiety levels are outpacing those of the state here on Bainbridge Island. And then also, as many of you might recall from the 2022 survey that was conducted by Island Volunteer Caregivers, 42% of islanders on the island, of seniors, on the island report being somewhat or very concerned about social engagement. So as we're thinking about how these interrelated areas are tied together by things like transportation and affordability, you can see the impact that respect and social inclusion, the hit that it can take in some of these negative areas. But we're going to get into some positive ones as well going forward. And one of the bright spots in this sort of respect and social inclusion area is diversity. One note is that our schools are more ethnically diverse than the community as a whole. So 24.3% of the student body identifies as non-white, which is pointing to the demographics of families who are moving to the island. And happily, in a growing number, 55% of nonprofit organizations report specifically promoting diversity, education, and inclusion in its many forms within their organizations over the past year. All right, next slide, please. We're going to talk about connection to place. This really refers to our physical environment. Overall, most of the community reports feeling positively connected to this place. And a factor of this could be that 17% of Bainbridge Island is either in public land ownership or protected through ownership and conservation land. The typical park and recreation agency nationally has 10.6 acres of parkland for every 1,000 residents. That's pulled from the National Recreation and Parks Association figures. Bainbridge Island actually has 61.6 acres per 1,000 residents. And there are a number of studies that show that access to green space has really positive impacts on physical and mental health, social cohesion, and can have tertiary benefits to civic participation as well. So this is an area in which we continue to trend really positively.
And we have seen some great works by our nonprofits to ensure that that's true. The Land Trust and the Parks Foundation, as well as Parks and Rec.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, in contrast, next slide, please. Talking about health services. More than 75% of the participants in the National Community Survey, which is conducted by the city, do not positively rate the availability of affordable healthcare. And that study was conducted over a year ago. And I think in that time, we've seen more healthcare providers either leave the island or limit their hours. So even at 75%, that puts us in the bottom 2% of the national benchmark. It ranks as one of the greatest challenges in the county, even beyond Bainbridge Island. And you can see, we've got some figures here, that there's really a pipeline issue. The number of health professionals needed to serve our population are far below the state averages and benchmarks. So again, really something that is affected by affordability, transportation, and access on the island.
We will be talking next week on something to talk about with a group that's trying to talk about creating a hospital district in Kitsap County. The goal is not to build another hospital, but to provide underlying health service support to try to stem the gap there on that. So watch for that coming up next Wednesday.
That's excellent. Thank you for that. All right, next slide, please. Education and learning. Access to quality education is critical for the future of our children. Lifelong learning, so not just for our children, such as access to art programs, technical training for adults, are also a really important part of a sustainable and supportive community. Certainly providing outlets to improve mental health and that social cohesion for all ages. These benefits can lead to positive impacts in many other interrelated areas, such as respect, social inclusion, and civic participation. We do see a major threat here, though. Even though education and learning are rated really positively, we have declining enrollments, which is certainly affecting funding. I know lots of us are probably following what's happening with our schools and the needs and how we're having to plan ahead for changes in demographics. So here you can especially see the impact of affordability on education and how sometimes those two things can be partners for better or worse.
Could I ask a question, Dominique?
Sure.
I'm Susan. I understand you have St. Cecilia's private school and some private or I don't know if they're there's the regular school system, but then you have several different private.
Mm-hmm.
Who is competing? Is it the charter schools or these private independent schools that are competing for the monies?
That is a really good question. It's one that I'm probably not prepared to best answer. But one of the great things about this report is that it's designed to help provoke those questions and to get individuals and community members to talk to members of the school board, to talk to the schools and to one another, to really figure this out and to potentially seek out creative solutions to problems that frankly are really evolving, and to do that collaboratively. So in schools like the nonprofits, being collaborators rather than competitors is a really essential part in my mind of moving forward as a community. So I'm sorry I don't have a direct answer, but I'm thrilled that you asked the question.
I think it's worth thinking about where to follow up with our school folks when we get a chance somewhere ahead in the podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Connection to culture. This is another bright spot in terms of access to diversity and cultural programs. Also, it's important to note that this sector is an economic multiplier. So according to the Americans for the Arts Economic Impact Calculator, every dollar that's invested in the island's cultural organizations has 160% return in the community. So even when you are giving or spending your money at nonprofits, there is like an actual, we hear about trickle down economics. Well, it really is waterfalling in the island's cultural organizations, which is really cool to see. It's an area where islanders are particularly engaged and largely satisfied, but in which we see some significant challenges. Only 56.25% of nonprofit organizations in the cultural sector are meeting their fundraising targets, and just over half of employees in the sector actually live on the island. Affordability and transportation are significant areas of concern for arts and cultural organizations, despite, I think, an outward appearance of success and positive rating. Some of the negative trends we've talked about have a drag effect on other areas, and we see the reflexive to be true. Connection to culture has a positive impact on education, respect, social inclusion, connection to place, and as I shared, economic opportunity as well. Reed, do you want to say something?
Okay. So I was curious about that multiplier that you were talking about, given that you're saying that some of these organizations are having some difficulty meeting their fundraising expectations. You're talking about, for example, money that's spent elsewhere in the community, say for dining out or that kind of thing?
So yeah, that's part of it. Those individuals who are participating in cultural events are often dining out, attaching other experiences around that. But also a lot of these organizations are spending the dollars that they receive in the communities, particularly, hiring local artists, sourcing materials, that kind of thing. So this is a sector where investment really does stay locally in large part. Okay. Economic opportunity. One of the challenges that we see really comes from our geography. In part, it's closely tied to issues of affordability and transportation, as we've discussed earlier. Those are major limitations of employment opportunities on the island. So in order to demonstrate scale, we've listed in the full report the top 10 largest employers on the island. relative to their rank by size in the county, 5 of which we've got showing here in this slide. So, for example, the school district with 537 employees, last time I checked, ranks number 1. This is the number 1 employer on the island, but is 13th in the county, like well behind Naval Base Kitsap with over 38,000 employees and several other defense contractors, many of whom employ islanders. And one thing of note is that the city's 2024 comprehensive plan, which was released just at the end of the year, I think, holds economic opportunity as a central focus. And clearly it's going to be an area of perpetual importance and interrelation with these other factors. Next slide, please. Flying through this. Access to justice. This is an area in which truly valiant efforts are being made, but not without some significant and growing obstacles. So in landlord and tenant law, there's been a really sharp increase in the number of cases that Kitsap Legal Services have received, nearly 4 times as many in 2022 and 2023 as there were back in 2020. So while the number of clients that they're able to serve has grown, staffing issues keep them from being able to take on more than just a quarter of those received. So there's just an enormous need in this area. The data shows that staffing shortages are also having an adverse effect on domestic violence cases. So the YWCA of Kitsap County is able to serve 40% fewer clients seeking assistance now than they were able to in 2021. And you know that is not that cases have gone down or instances. It's truly a matter of capacity from the organization. So finally, as might not come as a surprise, unfortunately, there's been an enormous increase in demand for immigration assistance. So in 2023, the Kitsap Immigration Assistance Center was able to take on a really impressive 61% of those cases that came their way, which nearly half of which they were able to close within the year. But with a continuing number continuing increase in the number of cases across the area of need and a continued drop in service providers, we're calling out a negative trend here. And this is an area in which we're particularly going to want to keep an eye on as policies change in the coming days, months, and years, I would imagine. Which brings us to civic participation. This is an area where we can all be more involved, and which we see some really interesting trends. Bainbridge Islanders are among the top 1% of volunteers nationwide, but we engage in really different ways. So 6 out of 10 Islanders volunteer their time in a group or activity. Only 2 out of 10 have engaged with a local elected official or attended a public meeting. But 9 out of 10 community survey respondents have voted in a local election. But one thing of note is this is an area where we see a gap with young voters. So in Kitsap County, 31.4% of registered voters were under the age of 40, but only 16.5% of eligible voters in that age group actually cast their ballots in the 2023 general election. We're still awaiting those numbers to come out for 2024. But this is an area where we really want to see younger members of our community continue to get involved. Climate change appears to be an area of growing concern and engagement for younger people. That's where we see a significant increase in their participation as a demographic. One thing I want to call out, though, about volunteers, even though 60% of Islanders volunteer, even though we are in the top 1% nationwide, over 50% of island nonprofits report that they do not have enough volunteers to meet the service needs of their organizations. And I think that really points to how much work, how much value nonprofits in this community really have.
I think it also may speak a little bit to the way that volunteering has changed or the way that people want to engage. involved in a lot of volunteer efforts myself. I know that it's really easy to get folks to sign up for a one-off kind of opportunity. You know, are you free this Saturday to help serve a holiday meal, as opposed to, you know, can you take a regular Thursday shift at the food bank or at the senior community center?
That's exactly right. And I think that that's one thing that nonprofits are really wrestling with, how to make volunteer needs and practices sustainable, short of cloning Sheila, who I think is the top 1% of the 1% of volunteers on the island. So speaking of the Bainbridge nonprofit sector, clearly we have a robust and vibrant nonprofit sector with organizations that truly just move mountains to serve this community. And two items of particular interest that I want to call out is that in 2023 and 2024, fundraising fell below expectations for a growing number of organizations, as did the ability of organizations to recruit and match volunteers to their needs, as we were just talking about. But in spite of the resource constriction, quality and depth of programming is the first priority for a majority of organizations. And that's something that has changed a little bit. In prior reports, it's been fundraising and fundraising capacity. And I think we see organizations now figuring out how to invest the limited funds that they have in, again, the quality and depth of programming, which is really fantastic to see and consistent with what we see as a genuine commitment to providing the best possible services island-wide. Next slide, please. Trends in philanthropy. How does this fit into the broader national landscape? Nonprofits are by far the most trusted type of entity, which is really important when you look at how people give. But, and this is a big but, even as the need for access and connection and services grows is nationwide, the number of active donors, both among affluent and general populations, is dropping. So even as the size of gifts from major donors is increasing, this graph is one that nonprofits are going to watch really closely in years to come. Which, next slide, is where BCF comes in, at least in our community. There are a number of ways that the Community Foundation is working to address these issues, both through grant-making programs and also through, I mean, really extraordinary community education and professional development opportunities. Donors have a number of ways to connect their support to the organizations and the areas in which they're most interested. And BCF has the ability to assess and fulfill both nimble and long-term opportunities to meet the community's needs. So next slide was kind of where we're going to wrap up. We really hope that this report is going to be the catalyst for discussion, you know, among individuals and neighbors, organizations, leaders. I mean, really every one of you, because the biggest impact that most of us can have in our lives is right here at home. You know, when we wake up in the morning, there are so many things that we can't control. But one day at a time, we really have the power to shape our communities. And my hope is that this report is going to shine a ray of light and perhaps offer some insight on how and where to start.
Yeah, that was definitely going to be my next question was, how do you see this data being used? And I'm wondering if there was, per these questions that we have on the screen, questions like what part of the report was most surprising? What do you think we should be doing next in terms of thinking about the data that Dominique showed? Are there any comments or questions in that regard from anybody who's on the call here today?
One thing I want to note, Reed, is that, you know, we sort of called out some highlights. There's a lot more depth in the report as well. So please take the opportunity to really dig into it.
I'm curious, Dominique, what kind of outreach have you done to reach the regular Bainbridge Island residents? so they are aware of this stuff?
That's a great question. It's certainly one we've talked about a lot. We've done a presentation similar to this at the library. We're reaching out to organizations individually, but we're also going to be sending this out digitally, on a monthly basis, digging in with a little more depth to each of these areas, trying to promote conversations and facilitate dialogue around these areas. One of the things that we do to gather the data is to be in touch with a lot of the organizations. What are they seeing in terms of trends? Who are they reaching? What would they like to see? What do they need? And trying to really get in a little deeper so that organizations can have these conversations internally and with their constituents as well.
I certainly know. Go ahead. Go ahead, Jake.
I was going to say, Dominique, we're BCF donors and big fans of BCF, but I'm very aware though of all the support groups within BCF and the different ways that different donors donate at different donation levels and different points in their lives. But how does, and this may be something that I should know, but I don't, because this data is really important and it points out the gaps because there are huge gaps. That's what I see. When I look at the data, there's a big gap between it's on this island, it's the haves and the have-nots, and it's a great place to be if you have, but there's no place harder to be if you're struggling. How does BCF engage, like hands-on? Is there a way for BCF to engage a broader range of the community, a broader, deeper kind of demographic? Because we know we have so many people who want to do things, who want to encourage diversity, who can support it. But I'm just feeling like there's still voices that are not included in the conversation. So can you talk to us about that? That's really important to us.
Sure. I can't speak entirely on behalf of BCF, so I'll share sort of my own observations of the connections that they make. And it really starts with organizations. You see so much expertise, in organization, and there are 243 of them that serve the island. But in HRB, in Helpline House, in IVC, those who are working directly with constituents of need every single day. And so my experience is that BCF really listens closely to those organizations, their expressions of need, and matches donors, whether it's through a donor advised fund or several of the other arms to those needs through a number of different types of grants and grant cycles. Some of them might be in capacity building, others are directed towards capital. I think BCF doesn't presume to best understand the needs and certainly like the fluidity, the changing and transitional nature of needs. And so really promotes the ability of island nonprofits to best address them. We say, how to reach out, how to engage others. Connecting, things like connecting volunteers. There's a volunteer on Bainbridge Facebook page, for example, where you can say, hey, I'm new here, I want to get involved, and all the other nonprofits can say, hey, what do you love, what can you do? And I know that's an area where when I was at BPA, we had carpenters who were coming in, we had ushers like Sheila, and really connecting people to the organizations, to the things that they love, supporting values-based community building. In terms of reaching more people, it's working with organizations like One Call for All, the Chamber of Commerce, ensuring that not just the needs, but also the resources that exist on the island are amplified. That newcomers are being reached, that those who maybe have been here for a long time, whose needs are changing, are also really welcome into this, so that nobody falls into that sort of cold shadow that I think you described.
I do think that the idea of next level of thinking is what Jake's sort of hinting at a little bit about, like, where can we as a community, where can BCF as a foundation help tell the story of these gaps And it sounds like one way you're going to do that maybe is by trying to, on a regular basis, update us on some of these areas. I think that, the question that Susan asked about what are the factors that are pressing against our school district, in addition to the sort of assumption that the challenge is that it's harder to live here and there are fewer families. Maybe also there's greater competition from per capita from nonprofit and private schooling. So all those things might come together to make a picture, and if BCF could help us understand that, I think it would be great.
Yeah, I encourage everybody who's watching or listening to subscribe to BCF's online newsletter. Also check out regularly. There's a 2-pager in the 98110 that's delivered to every house on the island that really takes on a lot of the timely topics. Also, one of the things that we're going to do is restart the Directors Forum, which until about 18 months ago was really a consortium of executive directors in the cultural and humanities space. Getting about 10 organizations, the executive directors, to sit down and really talk face to face. What are the issues that we're facing organizationally? What are our constituents wrestling with, and how do we work together to address them? So one of the things that BCF is going to do is to resume the Directors Forum, get that conversation going between executive directors, and then also get it going for the health, human, public service sector as well, so that in a moment where I think there are some real opportunities for competition, we are collaborators instead of competitors. Affordability, as it's trending negatively, is not going to be addressed if everybody's really scrambling for resources. And so ensuring that nonprofits are working together to address the needs. BCF, I think, really sees that high water floats all boats, and we don't want to be leaving anybody stuck in the mud.
Well, sign the Senior Community Center up for that discussion group for sure. And I think that we also have recognized in the human services sector the value of trying to collaborate and not duplicate. And that one, if we all focus on what the challenges are rather than sort of who we are and what our organization can do, we can find out the right organization to do the right part of the job. Sheila, you have another comment? You'll need to unmute.
There I go. Yeah, I do. I wondered, speaking from my age level, there are so many facilities around here, people who I know and who are in their 70s and 60s and 70s and 80s who want to volunteer, who want to do things, but don't know how to get about doing it. And I don't know how you do that other than to present those programs in those particular facilities, quite literally, in a community house room or a room or something like that, and directly go to those places and say, these are the things that we have available, or what would you like to do, or that kind of thing. I know personally that there are people here at Winslow Arms of people who would like to volunteer, but don't really know what to do. They'll come to the senior center, but they're looking for things to do in the community as well.
Are you talking almost like a resource fair?
Well, or even it sounds like a mobile volunteer unit. It's like, we need this project done. Can you help us put it together? Here are the pieces of the puzzle. Can you help us put together a mailing? Or, I know that there's some, IVC does this wonderful Flowers from the Heart program. What if some of those flowers, those vases were put together at Winslow Arms rather than you having to go to the Eagle Harbor Congregational Church? Interesting idea, Sheila. Brilliant.
I know not everybody is on Facebook, but I encourage you, if you're not already a member of the group and you're willing to go on Facebook, that you join that, because it's a great place for organizations also to put those opportunities out there. Those one-offs that you were talking about, Reed, where, maybe somebody isn't able to make a weekly or monthly commitment, but might really love to come do floral arrangements or deliveries or any number of things. But I would encourage those who are not on Facebook, even just to reach out to us at BCF, or even just me aside from BCF. There's nothing that I like better than helping to connect people. I think that there are a number of individuals in the community who would be really happy to both share and connect resources. So I'll just throw that out there.
Thank you.
I commit to helping making those connections if you don't find them online.
Okay, Jake, another comment?
Oh, I was just going to say the resources are tremendous, and everything from stuffing envelopes to a heck of a lot more. There's so much talent and skill and history and experience on this island, and the difference between saying we're going to have a meeting, you need to come here or go online here, and having it show up in what Sheila's talking about in the dining room and in the place is an indication not only of how sincere our intent is to engage, but it's also just a smarter way of getting people in the room. So Sheila, I like it. I've had an experience where this has been tremendously successful working in school reform, where we had Latino communities being expected to go out to the country club school during the middle of the day on a work day and wondered why these parents just weren't signing up. And one dad and I cried like babies on the phone together when he described to me how he was already working 3 jobs trying to rear 2 teenagers by himself while working 3 jobs, and how painful it was for him to have. And so to be able to have somebody come to you and your community and your neighborhood says so much more. It just says a lot.
Well, Jake, I feel like this is an area where, I know certainly as long as I've been in the nonprofit sector here, we've been wrestling with it, and we could probably use some expertise and volunteer support. So if you'd be willing to have that conversation again and, potentially come and, talk through it, think through it, how can we really put this together and create something that's sustainable? I would love to work with you on that.
Well, I would love to be a contributing member. I know my limits about what I can do, but I'm the mentor sort of person now, and I'd be happy to have that conversation because there are things that work.
I would love that.
So the website, if you want to find the community report, is bainbridgecf.org, bainbridgecf.org. And you can download the report there, or as Dominique said, you can pick it up either at the Bainbridge Community Foundation on Madison, or I have a couple copies here at the Senior Center. Thank you very much for joining us today and walking through this, giving us a taste of what's here. And I do think that the idea of this next level of thinking, which we did a little bit of workshopping here today, is what we can do with a lot of these issues. So thank you very much for dropping by.
Thank you, Dominique. Thank you.